The desert wind carried a sound that most travelers never heard twice. A low, distant roar. Not the roar of a living creature, but the echo of something ancient, grieving. The ash waste stretched for hundreds of miles, a blackened desert where the sand looked like burned charcoal under the moon. Long ago, dragons had turned this land into a battlefield, and the firestorms of that war had melted the dunes into glass and ash. No one crossed the ash wastes anymore. Merchants avoided it. Armies avoided it. Even the bravest hunters refused to step into its silent dunes. Because in the center of that wasteland lay a place whispered about in fearful legends. The graveyard of dragons. Hundreds of shattered eggshells covered the desert floor like broken bones. Some were half buried by sandstorms. Others had been split clean open long ago. Every one of them had once held a dragon. Every one of them had died before it could take its first breath. And every night, the mother returned. High above the desert, enormous wings cut through the dark sky. The moon disappeared behind them. The creature descending from the clouds was so massive that the sand below trembled before she even touched the ground. The last dragon queen. Her name had once been spoken in or across kingdoms and empires. Seraphira. Her scales were the color of molten gold, though many were now scarred or cracked from ancient battles. Her wings stretched wider than castle walls, and her eyes glowed like dying suns in the night. Once, she had ruled the skies. Now, she only visited graves. Seraphira landed slowly in the center of the broken eggs, her claws sinking deep into the ash-covered sand. The wind died instantly. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, the dragon queen didn't move. Her enormous head lowered toward the shattered shells around her. Each one had been her child. Each one had been taken before it could live. The war had ended years ago. But extinction had not. One by one, Seraphira gently nudged the broken eggs with the tip of her snout, as if hoping one might somehow answer her. None did. They never did. A deep rumble escaped her throat. Not anger. Not rage. Something far heavier. Grief. The dragon queen slowly lifted her head toward the empty sky. For centuries, dragons had ruled the air above this world. Now she was the last one left. And soon, she would be alone forever. But then something moved. At first, Seraphira thought it was only the desert wind pushing the sand. But the movement came again. Closer. Near the center of the graveyard. The dragon queen froze. Her eyes narrowed. There, sitting quietly among the broken shells, was a human. A small figure wrapped in a torn desert cloak. A boy. Seraphira's wings slowly spread. The motion alone sent a violent gust of wind across the dunes. Humans did not come here. Humans feared dragons. Humans had helped destroy them. The boy should have been running already. Instead, he was sitting beside something. Seraphira's gaze shifted. And for the first time in years, the dragon queen felt something she had not expected. Shock. Because beside the boy, half buried in the sand, was an egg. Not broken. Not shattered. Whole. Seraphira's heart pounded once, violently. That was impossible. She had watched every egg die. Every single one. Yet this one sat there, untouched by the graveyard around it. The dragon queen stepped forward. Each step shook the desert like distant thunder. Still, the boy did not run. When Seraphira lowered her massive head toward him, her glowing eyes alone were larger than his entire body. One breath of dragon fire could erase him from existence. The boy slowly looked up. His face was thin, sunburned, and dusty from days in the desert. His dark hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. But his eyes were calm. Fear should have frozen him. Instead, he spoke. Softly. Hi. Seraphira's pupils narrowed into burning slits. The human did something even stranger. He placed one hand gently on the egg beside him, as if protecting it. The dragon queen's voice rolled through the air like distant thunder. A language older than kingdoms. Human. The boy swallowed but didn't move. Seraphira's enormous head lowered even closer. Close enough that her breath pushed sand across the ground around him. Why are you here? The boy looked down at the egg, then back at the dragon. For a moment, he seemed to be thinking carefully about his answer. Then he said something no creature had dared say to the dragon queen in centuries. I'm watching it. Seraphira blinked. The boy shrugged slightly. I found it buried in the sand a few days ago. He tapped the egg gently. It was cold. His voice grew quieter. But not dead. The dragon queen felt the desert tilt around her. Impossible. Dragon eggs did not survive alone in the cold desert nights. Not for days. Not without a mother. Yet the boy continued. I thought something inside it was moving. He gave a small, stubborn smile. So I stayed. Seraphira stared at him. At the egg. At the tiny hand still resting protectively on its shell. Then the Dragon Queen felt something she had not felt since the war ended. Hope. But hope could be cruel. Her voice dropped to a whisper of thunder. Human. That egg has been dead for years. The boy shook his head. No. He pressed his ear against the shell. And after a moment, his eyes widened. He looked back up at the Dragon Queen. A slow smile spreading across his dusty face. You're wrong. The desert wind suddenly stopped. Because from inside the egg, something moved. For a long moment, neither the dragon nor the boy moved. The desert had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed afraid to breathe. Seraphira's enormous golden eye remained fixed on the egg. Impossible. Dragon eggs could not survive like this. They required heat from their mother's flames, protection from predators, and careful tending for months. Left alone in the cold ash wastes, they died. Every time. Yet the boy was still kneeling beside the shell, his ear pressed gently against its surface. He looked back up at the Dragon Queen, excitement in his tired face. It moved again. Seraphira's wings twitched slightly. Her claws tightened in the sand. She had heard the faint sound too. A tiny shift inside the shell. A pulse so small that most creatures would have missed it. But dragons never missed the sound of their own children. Her heart began pounding. Still, she did not let hope control her. Hope had betrayed her before. The Dragon Queen's deep voice rolled across the desert again. Move away from the egg, human. The boy hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of reluctance. He slowly stood up, brushing sand from his worn clothes. Up close, Seraphira could see just how fragile he was. He was thin. Far too thin. His clothes were torn, sun-bleached, and covered with dust from the desert. The boy had clearly been alone for days. Maybe longer. Seraphira lowered her head toward the egg. Carefully. More carefully than any creature her size should have been capable of moving. The massive dragon gently nudged the shell with the tip of her snout. Warm. It was warm. The Dragon Queen froze. Her enormous eye widened slightly. That warmth should not exist. Not in the cold desert night. She turned her gaze back toward the boy. Explain. The boy rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, it was freezing the first night. He glanced down at the egg. So I wrapped it in my cloak. Seraphira said nothing. The boy continued. And when it got colder, I just held it. Now the Dragon Queen truly stared. The boy pointed to the ground beside the egg. You can see where I slept. Seraphira looked. There were shallow depressions in the sand. Marks from someone lying curled around something small. Night after night. Her voice grew quieter. You stayed here? The boy nodded. For 3 days. Seraphira's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. The ash wastes were deadly at night. Temperatures dropped low enough to freeze water solid. Predators prowled the dunes. Scavengers hunted anything weak. Yet this fragile human had remained here. Protecting an egg that didn't even belong to him. Seraphira's golden eyes studied him more carefully. You knew a dragon might return. The boy shrugged. Yeah. And you stayed anyway. Another shrug. The Dragon Queen felt something strange stirring in her chest again. Humans had once hunted dragons. Humans had burned nests and shattered eggs. Yet this one had done the opposite. The boy suddenly spoke again. My name is Elias, by the way. Seraphira blinked slowly. It had been centuries since a human introduced themselves to her politely. Elias, she repeated, the name rumbling through the desert like distant thunder. The boy nodded. What's yours? The Dragon Queen stared at him. No human had ever asked her that. Most never lived long enough to try. After a moment, her voice answered. Seraphira. The boy smiled slightly. That's a cool name. The Dragon Queen did not know how to respond to that. Her attention shifted back to the egg. She leaned closer again, listening. Waiting. Seconds passed. Then. Tap. The sound was faint. But unmistakable. Seraphira's heart slammed in her chest. Another tiny movement inside the shell. Another soft tap. The boy gasped. I told you. He crouched down beside the egg again, eyes wide with excitement. Seraphira watched him carefully this time. The boy's hand rested gently against the shell. Not gripping. Not claiming. Just protecting. Like a guardian. Seraphira realized something then. The warmth inside the egg wasn't fading. It was growing stronger. Because for 3 days, this stubborn human had done something extraordinary. He had shared his body heat with the egg. Through freezing nights. Through desert winds. Through hunger. A dragon egg required warmth to survive. And Elias had given it exactly that. Seraphira slowly lowered her massive body to the ground beside him. The sand trembled as she settled. The boy glanced up. "You're not going to eat me, right?" The dragon queen exhaled a slow breath of warm air that washed over the egg. "No." The boy sighed with relief. "Good." Another soft tap echoed from inside the shell. The cracks were starting now. Tiny lines spreading across the egg's surface. The boy's eyes grew huge. "Is it?" Seraphira nodded slowly. "Yes." The wind outside the graveyard had begun to rise again, carrying sand across the broken eggs scattered around them. But at the center of the desert, something new was about to begin. The dragon queen stared at the shell, her golden eyes glowing softly in the darkness. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "My child lives." The boy smiled. "Tired. Dirty. But proud. I told you it wasn't dead." Seraphira looked down at him again. And for the first time in centuries, the dragon queen did not see a human enemy. She saw something else. Someone who had guarded her last hope when she could not. The shell cracked again. This time louder. A thin piece of the egg broke away. And something small moved inside. The crack spread slowly across the egg. At first it was only a thin line, barely visible in the moonlight. But then it widened. Snap. A small piece of shell broke free and fell into the sand. Elias leaned closer immediately, his eyes glowing with excitement. "Did you see that?" Seraphira had seen far more than that. The dragon queen's entire body had gone completely still. Her wings folded tightly against her sides. Her enormous golden eyes locked onto the egg. 4 years she had listened to silence in this graveyard. Now she heard something else. Movement. A faint scratching sound from inside the shell. The sound of claws. The sound of life. Seraphira's chest rose slowly as she drew in a long breath. She had dreamed of this moment many times. But dreams had always ended the same way. With broken shells. With cold silence. With the desert wind carrying away the last hope of her kind. Her voice rumbled quietly. "Step back, Elias." The boy hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "No." Seraphira lowered her head closer to the egg. "But the hatching may be energetic." Elias quickly scooted back a few feet in the sand, though he still kept his eyes fixed on the shell. Another crack spread across its surface. Then another. The egg trembled slightly. Inside, something pushed against the shell. A tiny claw briefly poked through one of the cracks. Elias gasped. "Oh wow." The claw disappeared again as the hatchling inside shifted position. Seraphira's breathing grew heavier. Her heart pounded louder with every movement. The shell split further. Small fragments began falling away into the sand. For the first time in years, Seraphira felt fear. Not the fear of battle. Not the fear of death. But the fear of losing something precious. Because dragon hatchlings were fragile in their first moments. If the shell broke wrong. If the hatchling was weak. If fate decided to be cruel again. Seraphira pushed those thoughts away. The egg shook harder. Crack. A large piece of shell suddenly broke off. And a tiny golden snout pushed through the opening. Elias clapped both hands over his mouth to stop himself from shouting. Inside the egg, the hatchling blinked weakly. Its scales were soft and pale, still damp from the shell. Its tiny wings were folded awkwardly against its small body. But its eyes glowed faintly like burning embers. Just like its mother's. Seraphira froze. For a long moment, she simply stared. Because after years of silence, after years of grief, her child was alive. The hatchling pushed again, breaking more of the shell away. It tumbled clumsily onto the sand, rolling once before managing to sit upright. The tiny dragon shook its head. Sand flew in every direction. Elias laughed quietly. "It's adorable." Seraphira didn't answer. She slowly lowered her massive head toward the hatchling. Carefully. Carefully enough that even the wind from her breath wouldn't knock the tiny creature over. The hatchling blinked up at the enormous golden face hovering above it. For a second, neither moved. Then the baby dragon chirped. A small, squeaky sound. Seraphira closed her eyes. The sound hit her like lightning. It had been so long since she had heard that sound. A dragon hatchling calling out to the world. The little dragon stumbled forward clumsily, its tiny claws slipping slightly in the sand. Elias leaned closer again. Is it supposed to walk like that? Seraphira opened one eye. Yes. The hatchling wobbled again. Then it froze. Its small head turned slowly. Toward Elias. The boy blinked. Hi there. The hatchling stared at him for a moment. Then it took a step. Another step. And another. It waddled across the sand toward the boy. Seraphira watched silently. Dragon hatchlings usually bonded immediately with their mother. They recognized her scent. Her voice. Her warmth. But this hatchling hesitated halfway between them. Its head tilted slightly. As if confused. Elias slowly extended one hand. Hey little guy. The hatchling sniffed the air. Then it walked the rest of the way. Right up to the boy. Elias held his breath as the tiny dragon reached him. The hatchling sniffed his hand once. Twice. Then suddenly it chirped happily and climbed straight into his lap. Elias burst out laughing. Whoa! The tiny dragon curled up against his chest like a warm, scaly kitten. Its wings wrapped loosely around his arm. Its small tail flicked lazily across the sand. Seraphira stared. This was not supposed to happen. Dragon hatchlings bonded with their mothers. Not with humans. Yet the tiny creature looked perfectly comfortable. Even happy. Elias looked up at the dragon queen nervously. Is this okay? Seraphira did not answer immediately. She simply watched the two of them. The boy gently scratching under the hatchling's chin. The hatchling chirping softly in response. Finally, the dragon queen exhaled slowly. A long, warm breath across the desert sand. Her voice came quietly. He knows you. Elias blinked. What? Seraphira lowered her head beside them. Her enormous eyes studying the tiny dragon closely. For 3 nights, your warmth kept the egg alive. The hatchling curled deeper into Elias' arms. Its eyes slowly closing. To him, Seraphira said softly. You were the first thing he ever felt. Elias looked down at the sleeping dragon in his lap. Then back at the enormous queen. So. He hesitated. Does that mean he thinks I'm his? Seraphira finished the sentence. His protector. The boy looked stunned. The dragon queen watched him quietly. In the graveyard of dragons? Among hundreds of broken shells? Something impossible had happened. The last dragon child had survived. And the first creature it trusted was human. The tiny dragon slept peacefully in Elias's lap. Its small body rose and fell with soft breaths, its warm scales glowing faintly in the moonlight. Every few seconds its tail twitched, as if it were dreaming. Elias barely moved. He was afraid even the smallest motion might wake it. So, he whispered slowly, what happens now? Seraphira watched them both carefully. The dragon queen's massive golden eyes reflected the sleeping hatchling. For centuries, dragon hatchlings had always followed the same instinct. They bonded with their mother. They stayed close to her wings. They learned the skies from her. But this hatchling had made a different choice. And Seraphira understood why. Because when the egg had been cold, when the desert winds had frozen the night air, it had not been her warmth that kept the child alive. It had been the boy's. The dragon queen slowly lowered her head closer. The sand shifted softly beneath her enormous weight. Let him sleep, she said quietly. Elias nodded. Got it. They sat there in silence for a while. The moon climbed higher in the sky. The desert wind slowly returned, whispering through the graveyard of broken eggs. But the tiny dragon didn't wake. After a while, Elias looked down at the hatchling again. Does he have a name? Seraphira was silent for a moment. Dragon names were not chosen lightly. They carried meaning, history, legacy. But as she looked at the tiny creature curled around the human boy's arm, a thought crossed her mind. He will earn his name, she said. Elias nodded. That makes sense. Another quiet moment passed. Then Elias asked something that made the dragon queen pause. So, are there really no other dragons left? The question hung in the desert air. Seraphira's wings shifted slowly against the sand. No. Her voice was calm. But heavy. The war destroyed our nests. The last eggs died here. She gestured slightly with her head toward the broken shells scattered across the dunes. Until this one. Elias looked around the graveyard. For the first time, he truly noticed how many shattered eggs surrounded them. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. The boy swallowed quietly. That's a lot of loss. Seraphira did not respond. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. The hatchling suddenly stirred. Its small claws flexed against Elias's sleeve. Elias froze. Oh, I think he's waking up. The tiny dragon yawned. A surprisingly large yawn for such a small creature. A puff of warm air escaped its mouth, carrying a faint spark of golden flame. Elias's eyes widened. Whoa! The hatchling blinked sleepily and looked up. Its glowing eyes immediately found Elias's face. It chirped happily. Then it climbed higher onto his shoulder. The little dragon nuzzled the side of his neck, clearly comfortable. Seraphira watched closely. Normally, a hatchling's first instinct would have been to climb toward her. Toward the safety of the mother dragon's wings. But the hatchling stayed exactly where it was. Perched proudly on Elias's shoulder. As if that was the most natural place in the world. Elias chuckled nervously. I think he likes me. Seraphira's voice came softly. He does. The hatchling chirped again and wrapped its tiny wings loosely around Elias's neck like a warm scarf. Elias carefully held one hand near the dragon so it wouldn't fall. Okay, this is happening. Seraphira tilted her head slightly. The situation was unusual. But not entirely wrong. Dragons respected strength. But they also respected loyalty. And this boy had shown a kind of loyalty most warriors never did. The dragon queen slowly rose to her full height. The sand trembled slightly as her wings stretched open. Elias looked up quickly. Is something wrong? No, Seraphira answered. But dawn is coming. Elias glanced toward the horizon. A faint silver light had begun to appear behind the distant dunes. Morning was approaching. The desert would soon grow dangerously hot. Seraphira lowered her head toward him again. You cannot stay here. Elias frowned slightly. Yeah. I kind of figured that. He looked down at the tiny dragon clinging to his shoulder. But what about him? Seraphira studied the hatchling carefully. The small dragon chirped proudly and puffed a tiny spark of flame into the air, clearly pleased with itself. The dragon queen made a decision. A decision no dragon in history had ever made before. You will come with us. Elias blinked. Wait, what? Seraphira spread her wings fully. The rising wind pushed sand across the graveyard. You protected my last child. Her golden eyes met his. Now you will help raise him. Elias stared at her. You're serious? Yes. The hatchling chirped happily, clearly approving of this plan. Elias looked between the tiny dragon and the massive queen. Well? He scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I guess that makes sense. Seraphira lowered one massive wing toward the ground beside him. A living staircase of golden scales. Climb on. Elias hesitated only a second. Then he carefully stood up, making sure the tiny dragon stayed balanced on his shoulder. All right. He stepped onto the dragon queen's wing, climbing slowly toward the space between her shoulders. The hatchling chirped excitedly as the wind grew stronger around them. Seraphira spread her wings wider. The desert trembled beneath her. And in the graveyard where dragons had once gone extinct, something impossible was about to rise again. A dragon queen. Her last child. And the human boy the child had chosen. The dragon queen launched into the sky. And the future of dragons flew with her. The sky over the ash wastes had been empty for years. For a long time, travelers crossing the distant trade roads had grown used to that silence. No shadows passing over the sun. No thunder of wings above the clouds. The age of dragons, they believed, had ended. But on the morning after the last egg hatched, the sky changed. A massive shape rose above the desert. Golden wings stretched across the dawn light as Seraphira, the last dragon queen, climbed higher into the air. And this time, she was not alone. Between the massive ridges of her shoulders sat a small human boy gripping her scales carefully. Elias. The wind whipped through his hair as the desert shrank far below them. On his shoulder, the tiny hatchling chirped excitedly. The little dragon flapped its small wings as if it already believed it could fly. Elias laughed. Easy there. The hatchling responded with a proud squeak and puffed a tiny spark of flame into the wind. Seraphira glanced back slightly. You should hold him tighter. Elias quickly wrapped an arm around the small dragon. Right. Got it. They flew for hours. Far beyond the graveyard. Far beyond the endless dunes of the ash wastes. Eventually mountains appeared on the horizon. Tall black peaks rising above thick forests. Hidden among those mountains was something few humans had ever seen. The last dragon sanctuary. A massive valley surrounded by cliffs so steep that no army could climb them. Ancient stone arches and crumbling towers filled the valley floor, ruins from a time when dragons and other creatures had once lived together. Now the valley was quiet. But it was safe. Seraphira descended slowly into the center of the valley. Her wings folded as her claws touched the stone ground. Elias carefully climbed down from her back. The hatchling immediately jumped from his shoulder and began waddling around the valley floor with excited chirps. Elias looked around in awe. Whoa! The valley was enormous. Streams of clear water ran through patches of green grass. Old stone statues of dragons stood half-covered in vines. This place is amazing. Seraphira watched the hatchling exploring the grass. This was once our home. Elias glanced at the ruins. Was? Seraphira's voice was calm. The war ended that. The hatchling suddenly tripped over a small rock and rolled into the grass. Elias rushed over. Hey, you okay? The tiny dragon popped up immediately and chirped proudly. Elias laughed. Yeah, you're fine. Seraphira watched them quietly. Then she spoke. The world will eventually learn the truth. Elias looked back at her. What truth? That dragons still exist. The boy thought about that for a moment. Won't that cause problems? Seraphira nodded slowly. Many will fear it. She lowered her massive head toward Elias. But fear is not always the same as war. Elias looked down at the hatchling again. The tiny dragon was now trying to chase a butterfly. It stumbled repeatedly but refused to give up. The boy smiled. So, what happens next? Seraphira studied him carefully. You stay. Elias blinked. Here. Yes. She looked toward the hatchling. He trusts you. The tiny dragon chirped again as it finally caught the butterfly, only for it to fly away again. Elias chuckled. I think he thinks I'm his big brother or something. Seraphira's voice rumbled softly. Perhaps you are. Days passed. Then weeks. The hatchling grew quickly. Its wings strengthened. Its flames grew brighter. And everywhere it went, Elias followed. The boy built small shelters in the valley ruins. He helped gather food. He taught the hatchling games. And the tiny dragon followed him everywhere like a loyal shadow. Seraphira watched it all carefully. Because something strange was happening. The hatchling was learning the ways of dragons from her. But it was learning the ways of humans from Elias. Curiosity. Patience. Kindness. Years later, travelers passing near the distant mountains would sometimes see something unbelievable. A golden dragon flying high above the clouds. Behind her flew a younger dragon, smaller, but growing stronger every year. And between them, riding easily on the back of the young dragon, was a human. The boy who had once sat alone in the desert. The boy who refused to abandon an egg everyone believed was dead. By the time kingdoms finally learned the truth, it was already too late to fear dragons again. Because the last dragon in the world did not fly alone. He flew with a guardian. A human who had protected him before he was even born. And the world would one day remember a simple truth from that story. Dragons may have survived because the egg hatched. But their future existed because one stubborn human boy refused to walk away from something fragile. Even when the dragon queen herself returned.